Hello and welcome to Democratic TV, TV by Democrats and for Democrats and often about Democrats. I am Matt Shears, the chair of the Knox County Democratic Party. We are joined tonight by a group of venerable guests to Democratic TV. We're very glad to have them. First of all, we have the esteemed Miss Georgiana Vines, writer, former editor, and current columnist at the Knoxville News Sentinel. Secondly, we have former Knoxville mayor and ambassador to Poland, Victor Ashe. And then lastly, we have the talented Jack Vaughn, up-and-coming politico and map maker, who's been a field organizer for Knox County Democratic Party, and a student at the University of Tennessee. So hello to you all, welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Tonight, we are going to look at the details of the recent 2020 November general election in Knox County. We're going to analyze some of the results. Jack Vaughn has looked at the results of several of the races this fall in each precinct and has put some analysis into several precinct maps of the county to give us a quick readout on how red or blue each precinct was in 2020 and some projections on the change in each precinct as well. So Jack, would you start us off, start off the discussion by going over your maps, add in some analysis to what your research is showing occurred in the election, and when you're finished, I'll ask our veteran political observers to weigh in on our analysis and ask us both some questions. So go ahead, Jack.
All right, so this first map shows the precinct level results from 2016 and as well as 2020. So each of these is just a representation of if there's a darker blue precinct, it voted with a margin better for Democrats, and if it's darker red, it voted with a margin better for Republicans. So you can see that there were a few changes between the two elections. So in 2020, there were 8 precincts that voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but voted for Joe Biden this time. So there were 4 up there in North Knoxville, there were 3 in West Knoxville, and there was 1 in South Knoxville. But in addition to flipping, there were quite a few that had some bigger shifts, particularly in West Knoxville. So the Bearden High School precinct saw a pretty big shift of 12 points. Even some of the lighter red precincts in West Knoxville in House District 18 saw some shifts that were upwards of 18%, but they didn't quite flip. So there was lots of movement, especially in North and West Knoxville, in comparing these two maps. And the second map I can pull up actually shows the shifts. So this map right here, the darker blue means that there was a larger shift, and any of the red precincts show a shift towards Republicans. So you can see the darker colors in the south, north, and west of the county indicate bigger shifts towards Democrats than in other parts of the county, like down in Farragut or out in East Knox County or North Knox County. So it is pretty in line with what we're seeing nationwide, where the suburbs and the cities are moving leftward at a larger pace than some of the rural areas, if they are shifting towards Democrats at all. So within the city of Knoxville and just outside in the suburbs, especially in West Knox County, we've seen between these two elections, at least, a bigger shift towards Democrats.
And Jack, is that vote based on the votes that Joe Biden got?
Yes, this is a representation of the president.
It's not based on congressional candidate or state legislative, but on the presidential.
Right. Yeah, these are just the presidential elections, so the top line.
And I'll add into what Jack says that we did see an 8.5 point shift towards Democrat Joe Biden in this election from 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And that is the 3rd largest shift of any county in the state, behind Williamson County and Rutherford County. So Rutherford County saw a very large shift, so did Williamson County, and then we were 3rd with 8.5 point shift towards Democrats on the presidential level as well. And to give a little microcosm of some of the shifts that have happened, if you look at Sequoia Hills, which is precinct 24Q, in 2000, 12, Mitt Romney won Sequoia Hills by 15 percentage points. In 2020, Joe Biden won it by 21 percentage points. So in that 8-year shift, just that one precinct has swung in that direction. Like Jack said, we saw a good number of precincts flip from Trump to Biden, and some of the precincts shifted quite starkly too, particularly in South Knoxville. We saw some precincts shift over 15% towards Joe Biden from Donald Trump. Well, with that brief analysis overview, I want to hand it over to Georgiana and Victor to ask both of us some questions about it, the presidential election, or all the way down to state house and county commission races as well.
Well, I have a question or maybe an observation that I'm wondering. Okay, first of all, did you all do any post-election polling to see who people voted for right after the vote in any of the precincts in Knox County? And one of the reasons I'm wondering is I kind of wonder if Biden Biden didn't get some Republican votes that are reflected in your analysis. But that's just a theory. It's somewhat based on who I saw at the rally for Michael Bloomberg. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of businessmen there. Most were identified with the Democratic Party, but not all, like Eddie Manis was there. So I kind of thought that he might have benefited in this county from some of the business people who would never acknowledge it, I don't think, but I have wondered about it.
Yeah, we didn't do any specific exit polling, but I will say anecdotally, we did have Republicans stop by the Knox County Democratic Party office to pick up Joe Biden signs. If you look at some...
So it may not have just been business people, but I did think, especially since you're seeing more votes in the western part, not the extreme western, mm-hmm. but closer into the city.
Yes, right. And I do think that in some ways there are some ticket splitters out there who maybe voted for Biden and then voted for Republicans down ticket.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear.
When we look at precinct by precinct level, even increasingly more, kind of like Sequoia Hills example, is that as they trend towards Democrats, it's a slower pace that they vote down ballot for Democrats, but Gloria Johnson is winning Sequoia Hills handedly.
Well, I personally live in Sequoia and certainly have seen the shift which has occurred. Clearly, the demographics are different. Even 4 years ago, when Hugh Nystrom was elected for the one term he served on county commission, and while he won handily in the district, much more than Kyle Ward won, he lost Sequoia to Marlene Davis. Marlene Davis was a quality Democrat candidate, retired Dean Emeritus of the UT School of Art and Architecture, and certainly extraordinarily well qualified and energetic in her campaign, and she lives in Sequoia. But the fact that, Nystrom was a good Republican candidate. There weren't any real flaws. He hadn't upset anyone. He wasn't engaged in inter-party feuding and that sort of thing. So he was a quality candidate as well. And I think Sequoia has just shifted. There's no getting around that. And although Gloria's margin against Elaine Davis was less this year than it was against Eddie Smith 2 years ago. She beat Eddie Smith by about 2,000 votes district-wide. I think the margin dropped down to about 1,300 this time. That's still a solid win, but it is also a drop. And I would say Eddie Smith was a much better candidate than Elaine Davis was. Mm-hmm. Part of it is that we really don't have a lot of effective media anymore that lets people know where the candidates stand on issues. And the Republican candidates basically refuse to debate.
And that's really odd. But it's almost almost every single one. These programs that...
I'm not sure how you're going to get around that. The News Sentinel doesn't do the in-depth reporting anymore. Basically, they don't have the staff to do it. I'm not sure where to start. When I first ran for office 52 years ago in 1968, I had a contested primary running against a Republican incumbent, won. And then I faced a very qualified Democratic candidate, Harold Wimberly, who later just come off the GE College Bowl, which was a big event in the early 60s. And we had a team from Knoxville, of which he was one. And he later went on to become a circuit court judge and highly regarded in that. And that was in the days running someone in friends efforts. And, your opponent was not your enemy. And, but, there were a lot of Democratic office holders in those days. Bob, in the county level, Bob Broom, Gordon as a trustee, Gordon Sams as register of deeds, Bill Luttrell, a county court clerk, Howard Bozeman is it was called county executive in those days, but and then later you had 15 or 20 years later, Tommy Shepard defeats Dwight Kessel, the longtime incumbent. Randy Nichols is elected judge and then district attorney general. And back when there were 19 members of the county commission, there were at least 5 or 6 Democratic members of the county commission, which today, of course, there are 2. There was only 1 in the last election. So I think the question Democrats have to look at is, you had pretty good success at the presidential level, success in the sense you increased by 7 points countywide, but it didn't trickle down to the lower level candidates. I mean, you had a good candidate, I think, for Congress. She did everything she probably could do and really showed very little percentage-wise, she did worse. Vote-wise, she did better, but only because there were more voters voting. We'd spend the rest of the program talking about that. And in the legislative races, unlike 2 years ago when Mark Daniel had a very close race with Greg McKay, Eddie Manis didn't have his close race was with another Republican, Gina Oster, and had a huge inter-party split. The Republican county chairman attacked him as being a Democrat running as a Republican. Party was badly split, and it didn't matter. He won by 3,000 votes. It may have helped him, actually. And in one precinct, Dino Rec Center, Eddie Manis got more votes than Becky Massey, Tim Burchett, or any other Republican on the ticket. And in that particular district that he won by 3,000, Donald Trump did carry it, but only by about 450 votes. It was almost an evenly split state legislative district. And so I think, and you had a quality candidate. Virginia Crouch was a legitimate, credible candidate, just as
I think all the Democratic candidates were this time.
Elizabeth Rowland was part of it is, well, given what happened, perhaps victory wasn't going to happen. You start out that way. But I think the decision to let the COVID crisis eliminate any door-to-door campaigning was a serious political mistake. The Republicans went out and did it. They may have stayed 6 feet away from the front door, but they were there. I mean, there were ways of doing it, and I don't think it helped at all.
I'd like to go back and speak to what he had to say about the media, because in some of the questions you said that we might get into was some of how the dynamics have changed. Mm-hmm. And I definitely feel that the coverage of events, to Victor's point, has also impacted who gets elected. And it's changed. It's what's happening. Politicians used to, the news media, and let me speak specifically about the News Sentinel since I work there. I mean, they used to really cover the candidates on issues and everything else. Once the early voting started, they had to learn just like the candidates did. We need to get this information out sooner. So I have to agree with the point he made about what was offered. But the candidates also have taken advantage of social media, and they don't go to the established traditional media anymore. It's become either a combination or it depends on the campaign. I know, I'm quite sure when Madeline O'Hara won, she spent more money in social media than she did in print. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, because she felt like her money went further. So that has also affected other things. I would not suggest, and I don't mean to leave the impression that the paper's only going to cover the candidates who are advertising in it. I don't, but it's just part of the dynamics of the change that's gone on. And the other thing that happens, it's very frustrating to organizations that try to put on these forums, and it can be very frustrating to the media too. People don't really pay attention to the campaign until very near the end. I can't tell you the number of calls we used to get saying, when can you tell us about these candidates? And we've been writing about them the whole time. So from your perspective, you may need to help your candidates make sure that the push is really towards the end, because that's when people are paying attention to what's going on. And then I would say addressing some of the points that he made about, otherwise, if something isn't answered, it is applied to everybody else. And I think a really good example of that happened in judicial races in, was it 2016 or 2018? I guess it was 2016, where there was some top Democrats who were judges who got defeated in Knox County, to the amazement of a lot of people. Probably not them, because I think they had their own polling going on, but all of that got caught up in what was happening at a national level. And I can't tell you the number of people who said to me afterwards, why didn't you tell us about this judge or that judge? Well, first of all, they didn't ask me. And secondly, I probably wouldn't have anyway, but they didn't know it. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Also in advance, you don't particularly know which candidate is going to turn out to have a close race and not. And I'm referring specifically, actually, the county commission district that I live in, where Hugh Nystrom had retired. And the guy who I guess thought he would win, Scott Brawls, was defeated by Kyle Ward, who basically out hustled him and out campaigned him in terms of door-to-door campaigning. Now that occurred before COVID really hit, because remember, this year the primary was in March. So, that wasn't an issue in terms of his door-to-door. And then the Democratic candidate was a person named Fromeyer, who, the general consensus was he's going nowhere. No one knew anything about him. It wasn't a real race. And lo and behold, he only loses by 800 or 900 votes. It was much closer than anyone had anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And
Todd really put in the work with his campaign as well, making sure that he was contacting people daily. I mean, he was full-time running and did a very good job with his.
And I think he was helped by the fact that Ward, I think, probably thought he had it won, didn't have to do a lot, and didn't do nearly as much in the runoff as he had in the primary. And since then, he's obviously been very active on county commission and taking on the health board, which will trigger all sorts of debate and a very strong division of opinion among a lot of people, including Republicans. Mm-hmm. Having said that, that district, which overlaps somewhat with the Martin Daniel, Greg McKay district, and now the Eddie Manis district, which I think we could all say that's a district that could be won by Democrats. Give it a weak Republican candidate and a strong Democratic candidate can probably win. If it's evenly strong, probably the Republican wins, at least for now. Now, the demographics may continue to change, but that is clearly Sequoia, I think, voted for Fromeyer over Ward.
This is where we're going to miss people like the late Ben Ashley.
Right.
Because when they used to get into that, he's told us, I've heard him tell the story, at least he told me, they really did try to work. Of course, he was in the minority the whole time, although one time I guess he was really in the majority, but decided he didn't want to be House Speaker. But they would start with the incumbents, and they started with the congressional candidate, the congressman, and what they wanted and what they felt they could do with them, and then they went into the legislative seats. But you don't have that going on anymore. I mean, Randy McNally, I mean, he does have a part of Knox County, but on this subject, I don't know whether he cares what happens here or not. It would certainly behoove the Democrats if they can work with them on that, but I don't know whether it's negotiable.
We're particularly interested to see what happens with Senate District 7, because that is the Senate district in Knox County that we have found to be the most competitive district. And as the demographics change, Richard Briggs district, yes. Depending on what that district looks like in 2022, that could be our most competitive district too. And depending on who, if or does primary Dr. Briggs in the Republican primary, probably from the right.
Well, you know, the problem that the Democrats have had with, on the Senate side, not on the House side, is the two most moderate Republicans are Becky Massey and Richard Briggs. And some of the issues that Democrat candidates might use, like Insure Tennessee, they voted for. Whereas on the House side, many of them did not.
I imagine going forward, though, that as you see what I call the radicalization of the Tennessee Republican Party, I think that I believe that Richard Briggs will face a primary challenge from the right, because you can see how people. I mean, I've had Republicans tell me, "Oh, Richard Briggs is a Marxist."
Well, I'm sure there are some who feel that way.
Well,
and this
very few medical doctors are Marxists. They tend to be really conservative.
oh God.
But I agree with you. And the issue that's coming up right now for Dr. Briggs is he's the one who is opposed to neutering the health boards in the 6 largest counties. Governor Lee hadn't indicated where he stands, but actually a bill being introduced reduces the governor's authority as well, which I would think Governor Lee would not think much of. But,
it was very interesting.
My guess is that it could very well pass the House, and the Senate obviously operates in very mysterious ways, and it'll hit troubled waters in the Senate, and it wouldn't surprise me to see that it stays in committee for a 2-year study.
Well, Becky Massey did not commit to supporting the present setup on the health board during the campaign, when she was the one Republican who did attend a League of Women Voters forum. Her Democratic opponent, Jane George, do I have it in the right order? Always have something. You know, she was very supportive of the Board of Health and the present setup in the state. Becky talked about how you have to consider all various viewpoints on that, and she absolutely did not come out in support of it. So now Briggs may have some influence on her.
Yeah, and to your point,
she is not as strong on it as he is.
Yeah, to your point, Georgiana, I believe that Senator Massey, I mean, at the end of the day, she's part of the supermajority. And she does not stand up to the supermajority on nearly any issue. And I would add, too, that she was also a signer of the supermajority's letter supporting election fraud and Donald Trump's right to overturn the election results, which is not a moderate stance at all.
Going 20 years in the future, I can see a Knox County that is nearly solidly blue. And when I say that, I mean maybe 10 to 15 percentage points. Seeing what Williamson County and Rutherford County and Nashville in the past, I can see that the current trends match what happened in Davidson County in the past, and especially in the suburbs. So with Sequoia Hills and the more educated parts of Knox County shifting, I can see maybe not that quick, but in 20 years, I think it's a reasonable assumption that Knox County is at least 50-50.
Well, I don't disagree with Jack in the sense that I think it's going to be a lot more competitive. And again, I think particularly in the county elections, which tend to be, even though you run as a D or an R, people vote for the candidate more than the party. And I've just seen too many elections go that way. So I think if the Republicans put up flawed or weak candidates and the Democrats have a strong candidate, Democrat candidate can win.
I want to pose a question to both of you before we wrap up today, and that is just kind of broadly speaking. Can you speak to, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but in your time and watching Knox County, but then also Tennessee state politics, what would you say are some of the biggest shifts that have happened over your time as observers of Tennessee and Knox County politics?
Well, the legislature going 2-1, 3-1 Republican, no one could have imagined that. I mean, the Democrats only having 6 seats out of 33 in the Senate. It's almost like you weren't there. I was there with 9 Republicans. You couldn't, and 9's a whole lot more compared to 6. But you had a seat in the room. That was about it. And I know with only 6, Randy McNally has to double up, make sure there's at least a Democrat on every standing committee. He has to give some members three committees, so at least one's there. Hopefully that will come about, I think. But again, you have to have the right circumstances, and but as time passes, and if Republicans make bad mistakes, which they will.
And they are right now.
Well, they have.
Then it's a matter
We
of
have a different House Speaker already.
and then it's how do you take advantage of it? So we'll see what happens, but it'll be interesting to see how Eddie Manis does with the Republican majority, and because there'll be a lot of issues he won't agree with them on.
And what about you, Georgiana?
I don't know. I think I'd already talked about the changes I'd seen with fewer and fewer Democrats running. I think it's really important that there be a credible candidate in every race, if it's at all possible, so that people feel like they have a choice. Because so many people who are Democrats have their primary votes are going to show they're voting in the Republican primary because that's where it matters. And so I think if you can find them for every position, that not just to have somebody there, but somebody who isn't, because maybe if they don't win this time, they do in 2 years or 4 years, or get them on board so that they become better known or something like that. And then figure out the media dynamics. I would have op-ed columns, letters to the editor, take advantage of what's there on both TV and newsprint, as well as social media, which everybody's developing.
Well, I want to thank our wonderful guests, Dr. Ashe, Georgiana Vines, and Mr. Jack Vaughn. This has been Democratic TV, DTV. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.